Welcome. Today I wanted to show you the timeline in patterning and how we can use that to put together entire songs. For this example, I'm actually using the demo project. That is what first opens up when you have a fresh copy of patterning. But you can also recreate this if you want to follow along just from the main drop-down menu. You can go to demo song and that'll load our demo song. So you can do exactly what I'm doing. In patterning, a project has any number of patterns in it. So a pattern is the entire beat. So that's 8 tracks plus an FX tracks. Those 9 tracks together is a pattern. And so the timeline is all about putting these patterns together into a sequence so that you can kind of make a song. So a timeline is also like the song mode. So the song mode exists on this third page here. And you'll see the song editor, the timeline editor here on this page. To enable the timeline, we can use this timeline button on the transport. It's between the metronome and the record button. And you'll see when I toggle that on and off, it enables the timeline. So when the timeline's enabled and I hit play, it's gonna follow back from what's in the timeline. You can see that I already have a timeline created here, and the individual patterns are labeled on these timeline blocks. So I actually went through and labeled my patterns. If you don't know how to do this, like you can just tap on the pattern name and I can say verse 2. I think I already have a verse 2, so let's not do that. But you can rename your patterns there, and that's really useful when you're doing this kind of editing. So I already have a pattern here, but a song here, but I'll start from scratch and build a new one. So you've already probably seen, you can drag a box around pattern blocks to select them. You can pinch to zoom in and out, and also you can drag to pan. Okay, so let's start over. I'm gonna drag all of these, and I'm just gonna, once you have a selection made in the timeline, you get a different view on the right showing us different tools. So let's delete this. And if I want to make a song and nothing's selected, we'll have this add pattern add pattern control. And on this, basically, you're just going to hit the pattern you want to add, and it'll add a block 1 measure long of that pattern. So let's say I want to go intro, verse 1, verse 1, verse 2, verse 1, verse 2. I don't have a chorus in this song, sorry. And then outro. So that's one way of working with this. We can just tap on things and add them 1 measure at a time. We can also select an individual block and just kind of, as you would expect, drag the edges of it to extend it, drag the middle of it to move it, and so on. So when you have nothing selected, you can add a block at the end. Some other editing tools that we have, if you have a selection, so let's say I have this section of, verse 1, verse 2, and I wanted to repeat that. With that selection, I can duplicate, insert, or duplicate at end. So the duplicate is going to duplicate that immediately afterwards and overwrite anything that's in the timeline. If I instead did duplicate insert, it will duplicate that and move everything over. So duplicate insert will do that. And then lastly, if I had a section and I wanted to duplicate at the end, I can just do duplicate at end. So that's some of the editing tools just for kind of putting together timeline sections. Also, I can change which pattern is in a block. So let's say I wanted both of these not to be verse 1 and verse 2, but to just be verse 1. With them edited, I could hit verse 1 or verse 2 and select which one of those is going. If you're familiar with in patterning 3, this idea of a fill pattern, which there's a video about over here, the fill patterns are sort of alternate versions of the patterns that you can turn on and off quickly to kind of make a drum fill or sort of variation on the pattern that you can quickly switch into and out of. With a selection made, I can turn on fill for a certain block in my timeline. So in this case, we'd have verse 2 followed by the fill version of verse 2. So that's really useful if you do, in fact, use those fill patterns in your project. The last thing about this main editor that's important to know about on our selection with our selected pattern, our selected blocks in the timeline, is this selection trigger. And this is This is important just because of the way patterning handles time. So you might have noticed one of the kind of defining features of patterning has always been that it allows you to have loops of different lengths in the same pattern. So like your kick drum might be 8 beats long and your snare might be 7 beats long, and you get polymeters. So in legato mode, when we move between patterns in the timeline, we don't worry about resetting the loop to the beginning. If a loop is gone out of sync with another loop because of its meter or because of rotation, which is another aspect of patterning, then legato mode means that it won't change the rotation, it won't reset the pattern in any way. If you set selection trigger to reset, you'll notice this dot appears on all of our timeline blocks, and that will tell the timeline to reset the drum pattern on each of those blocks. Let me show you an example of this. I'll just delete all these and let's go to, I'll make a short version of my intro, and I'll like duplicate it a bunch of times. And I'll make all of these reset, and then the last one, I'll have it play out. This was a bad example. It kind of worked, but let me choose verse 2 instead, verse 1 instead. So did you hear how these first 6 beats of the song, it actually just repeated the beginning of the measure? And we could watch this here happen here. So that in the timeline was resetting that pattern at the beginning of each block in the timeline. The timeline can loop, so we have a little looping button here, and with that enabled, it will loop whatever section of the timeline that you have selected with these flags here. So, again. Yeah, great loop. So that's useful if you are working on a specific part of the song, or you just want to play back a sequence of patterns in a loop. The other thing worth mentioning, not only worth mentioning, but the other important feature that is new in this version of patterning is that we can actually have multiple timelines. So this is our first timeline. It was given this name rototoms because patterning just automatically names things based on a long list of adjectives and nouns. You can rename the pattern, by the way. Oh, I forgot to show this. Let me show you this before we move on. When you're dragging stuff around in the timeline, it snaps to, in this case, right now it's snapping to quarter notes. I can change this behavior with this drop-down menu here. We can snap to a different, like I could snap to one measure if I always know that I want things to be on measure markings. Or, you could use 30-second notes if you really want to get in there and have fine-grained control over when a pattern starts. But the other thing I wanted to show you is that this is by default in 4/4 time, but that's just because the default song that I created is in 4/4 time. The meter of our song, which we can both set when we create a new song, but also from our tempo drop-down menu, if we set our meter to say 5/4 because we like prog rock. Did that sound like an insult? I hope not. I like odd time signatures. I think you get to figure that out from the app I made. If you choose a different time signature, the measures in the timeline will follow that. The other thing that I wanted to show you is that in this version of patterning, we can have multiple timelines. So this timeline is called rototoms. I can rename that. Let's call it like demo song. And in the timelines on the top, I can make either a blank new timeline or I can duplicate the current timeline. So if I hit the single plus sign, it'll make a new project. They called it trunks. Again, it's just using a list of nouns and adjectives. And I can draw in a new timeline there. If I have a timeline that I want to make a variation on, I can hit the double plus and it'll make a copy of that timeline. One thing that is really nice about the timelines feature is that not only can I have multiple timelines, but I can switch between timelines, and it'll switch using the same quantization logic that it uses when it switches between patterns. So let me show you what that looks like. It'll wait till the next measure. the amount of time that patterning will wait to change is based on the same logic for the changing patterns. And that's also under our tempo control, where we have our pattern launch quantize setting, which is, I guess that sounds kind of complicated, but if you can think of a better name for this, let me know. Pattern launch quantize. Quantize means at what point in time do we want to make the switch on according to the tempo. So we're quantizing it to one measure, so we wait for the next measure to either change a pattern or, in this case, change the timeline. So that's where we would set that if we want to smoothly be able to go between different timelines. Okay, I believe that's it for talking about timelines. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments, and I will see you another day. Happy patterning!